Hello, this video is to help you solve two-step equations without negatives. So this is two-step equations without negatives. These are going to be short videos to help you with the steps so that you can solve two-step equations. Now, these do not have negatives. First, let's talk about the parts. Each one of these parts of an equation, the 2x, the 1, and the 7 are all called terms. Terms. Okay, same thing with the 4x, the 3, and the 13. They're all called terms, which are part of an equation. You have the x or any kind of letter. That is called a variable. It varies. We don't know what it is until we solve the equation. You have constants. These are numbers that don't have variables or letters. And then the numbers in front or below letters are called coefficients. Coefficients because they go, or, co means together. They go together with that variable. So let's talk about what that means. When a number is in front of a letter, it means multiplication. Okay, that means 2 times whatever x is plus a 1 equals 7. So to find out what x is or isolate the variable means get it by itself on one side and all the numbers on the other. You're basically undoing a puzzle that they wrote. What did they do to this x? They added 1 and multiplied by 2. So we're going to undo the math they did to find out what that variable was before they did the math. Okay? All right. So we're going to do that by using the opposite operations to both sides to undo what they did. All right? So the first thing, we always move in two-step equations without parentheses is the number without a variable, the constant. We want to get it over here. We do that by doing the opposite math. The opposite of adding 1 is subtracting 1 to both sides. When we do that on this side, you have a number plus its opposite. That always gives you 0. And we're not going to write that down because 0 is none. It means it's gone. And we're left with our 2 times x equals 7 minus 1 is 6. Now we just have our second step to do. We're going to undo the math that they did. They multiplied by 2. The opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. And division is shown with fraction lines in algebra because we know that a fraction is always a division problem. The top divided by the bottom. That's how we get decimals. Okay, so divided by 2, divided by 2. Remember, the only rule in algebra is whatever you do to one side of the equation, you must do to the other side of the equation, any kind of math, other than taking off parentheses. We'll talk about that in the parentheses. Now, very important, because remember, y'all saw the hanger diagrams. We're keeping that balanced by doing the same thing to both sides. All right. On this side, when we divide 2 divided by 2, it gives us 1x. And we show that just with x. The only time we put a 1 in front of it is if we're combining x's, combining like terms, or if it's a negative and we need to move the negative. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And there we go. We found out what it was. Now we can put that back in to see if it's the right answer. 2 times 3 plus 1 should equal 7. Remember your order of operation. We always do multiplication before we add or subtract. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7, and it is. 7 equals 7. So x is 3. You can always check your answer to make sure it's correct. All right, by substituting it back in where the x is, or the variable, if they use a different letter. Let's move on to the second example. What did they do to this variable to make this math problem? They did it to both sides, guys. That's why we have to undo it to both sides. They took this x, they subtracted 3, and they added or multiplied by 4. And they did that to this side too. How do we undo that? By doing the opposite to both sides of the equation. Okay, so we're going to do the opposite math. Remember, on two-step equations without parentheses, the first thing we always do is the opposite of add or subtract, or the opposite of negative or positive. So we have minus 3 on this side. The opposite of subtracting 3 is adding 3, and we're going to do that to both sides of the equation. When we do that here, remember that gives us 0. You have a number plus its opposite is always 0. That leaves us with 4 times x equals 13 plus 3 is 16. Now we just have to undo the last step, which is multiplication. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. Divide by 4, divide by 4. When we do that on this side, again, that gives us 4 divided by 4, which is 1x, or x, because that's 1x, equals 16 divided by 4 is 4. Again, we could put this back in the equation to make sure it's correct. Where the variable is, 4 times 4 minus 3 equals 16. We do our multiplication. 4 times 4 is 16 minus 3. That's supposed to be 13, sorry, equals 13. And 16 minus 3 does give us 13, equals 13. So we did have the correct answer. Sorry that I put a 16 there to begin with. All right, and so x is equal to 4. This is how you solve basic two-step equations. There were no fractions in this yet, no negatives. So now what you're going to do is go work the problems that you were assigned today, the 5 problems, write them down on paper, use the steps that I've shown you. Your first step is always to do the opposite of addition or subtraction to both sides. Your second step is to do the opposite of multiplication or division. And then you can always go and substitute that answer you found back into the original equation to check to make sure it's correct. So that is a basic understanding and basic steps for solving two-step equations. Good luck on the work.